Hey, I'm going to try to do the labor and delivery story of my first child, Tanner, who is now 2.5 years old. I don't know if I can try to get it all done right now because I do have a 3-month-old who is pretty needy at the moment, so I'm going to try to get it done. I'd like to have it on video, that's why I'm taping it now. And also, I don't really like the way it happened. I don't like the outcome, the way everything was handled with my doctor, so I'd like to just kind of get it out there, and maybe saying it out loud will help me not be so bitter. Try to ignore the mess that is behind me. My living room looks like a toy store exploded. I don't really care, so it is what it is. I have my computer next to me. I have everything that happened typed up, so I'll probably be looking over there, try to get my facts right since it has been 2.5 years. I mean, some of those little things kind of you forget about after a while, so I am going to be looking over there every once in a while, try to remember what happened. Before I get started, I do have to say we were trying to get pregnant, so I was charting, taking my temperature. I knew when we conceived, but since my son was measuring a little bit on the bigger side, they moved my due date up 10 days. So even though I knew that was wrong, I should have known from that moment on that things were not going to happen the way I was hoping. So they said my due date was November 30th, 2011, when I knew it was December 10th, 2011. So when December 6th came along, they wanted me to be induced because I was overdue. I tried to argue it, but my doctor is extremely stubborn, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So if I could go back and change it, I would, but I can't. Anyway. December 6th came along. I got to the hospital about 7:30, got hooked up. I was not dilated at all. I wasn't having any contractions, so that's another sign things were not going to happen the way I wanted them to. You need to be, a couple centimeters dilated for hopeful induction. Hopefully things would work out that way, but I wasn't. So they gave me Cervidil. I did not want the Cytotec because obviously it's not FDA approved for your uterus and it can cause rupture. So they gave me Cervidil instead. I was on bed rest for a couple hours to let that work, and then I could get up walking around. I was cramping quite a bit after that, having contractions every 6.5 minutes that were lasting 1.5 to 2 minutes each, but they weren't painful. And that was kind of the case for the rest of that day. Having contractions all day long, but they weren't painful. I tried to walk around all day, tried to do squats. I was trying to do everything I could to get dilated, but nothing. From 7:30 in the morning to 10 p.m. at night, absolutely no change. So they started me on Pitocin. They should have just sent me home, but that's, it's one of those things I look back on now. 10 p.m. they started me on Pitocin. Still having contractions, they just weren't doing anything. 12 hours later, I was only 60 to 70% effaced, and he told me he would come back at lunchtime to break my water. I look back on it now, and I read through my medical reports, and at that moment was kind of where everything just completely fell apart. He did come back at lunchtime. I was only a fingertip dilated, and he still tried to break my water. It's ridiculous now that I think about it. I get really mad when I think about it. So it was after lunchtime, about 1:15. I was only fingertip dilated, but he tried 3 times to break my water, and on the 3rd time he got it. So my water was broken. There was no turning back at that point. And just kind of like a pause. I read through my medical reports, and at the moment when he broke my water, that's when my son had engaged his head sideways, transverse arrest, I think it's called. That screwed me over big time. He engaged sideways. There was no way he was coming out. Now, after my water was broken, I still having contractions, but I could actually feel them now, so they had gotten quite a bit more painful. I was sitting on the birthing ball, trying to rock my hips, trying to get through the pain. If I had known any better, I do now, I would have gotten up and moved and walked around some, tried counter pressure, you know, all that stuff that you learn after the fact. I had really bad back labor. It would start in my back and it would work way to the front, and as soon as the front wouldn't hurt anymore, it would work its way back to my back. I had absolutely no break, and you could see it on the monitor too. Those constant peaks, never actually going down into a valley. There was no breaks, and that's because he was presented wrong. He was not anterior. That made it really painful. So I sat on the birthing ball for hours, and I wish I had done something instead of just sat there. I wish I would have walked around and, you know, maybe somehow gotten him to turn. Around 3 p.m. I was 1 to 2 centimeters dilated. I was getting really, really nauseous. Thankfully, since I am a nurse, I knew to ask for some Zofran on my orders before I even, before I was even admitted. I knew I'd probably need it, and I didn't want to have to wait for it later on in the day. 1 to 2 centimeters, I started getting really nauseous, and they gave me the Zofran, and that seemed to help a little bit. And at that point, since I didn't really know any other pain management techniques, I did ask for some medication. I got the Nubane. It made me feel drunk, but it worked for a little while. My contractions were all over the place. I still didn't have a break in the pain, and I didn't know how to manage the pain. So I did ask for an epidural. I got it around 5 p.m. and I took like a 2-hour nap, and kind of just try to catch up a little bit. And I actually don't really remember even asking for the epidural, and I think that's kind of where things started getting a little hazy for me. But I got it, and I was happy. And after my nap, my Pitocin was at highest as it would go, and it was still not doing anything. So around 10 p.m. they had to turn it off to give my uterus a break, because it was just being worked way too much. I had been at the hospital for, I don't even know, it was there for 2 days. So they turned the Pitocin off, and they tried to let me kind of sleep a little bit, give my uterus a break, hopefully let the contractions that I was still having do something. I was still not dilating any more than I was earlier in the day, and they started throwing around the C-section word. And of course I started breaking down. I was really upset. I did not want to have a C-section. That's, didn't even plan for it. I had planned, to have my baby the way I was supposed to have my baby. Once they start mentioning that, you start feeling defeated and scared. About 12:30 in the morning, my Pitocin was turned back up because I was having the contractions. They started looking a little bit better. I started feeling them, felt like they were working a little bit harder, so I turned it back on, and about 4 o'clock I started spiking a temperature. And they started planning on the C-section around 8 a.m. He said I could go to 1 p.m. It would be 24 hours since my water broke, but they were kind of getting nervous because I was having a temperature. I was only about 4 centimeters dilated too. My temperature was 99.4 at 4 a.m. and then they came back and gave me antibiotics to try to fight it before it got worse. They kept coming in every 30 minutes, taking my temperature, and every 30 minutes it was higher and higher and higher and higher. By the time I had my fluids and the antibiotics going through, it was 7 o'clock in the morning. My temperature was 104.1. All I wanted was ice. I was super nauseous. The Zofran wasn't doing anything. I was throwing up. I was in pain. I was miserable. It was horrible. And I had hot spots all over my body where the epidural wasn't working. It was, I remember this very well. It was awful. And my temperature kept going higher and higher and higher. And at that point, I don't really remember anything. My husband and my mom kept track of things that were going on. They kept notes because they knew I wanted to have this birth story written out, and I wanted to try to remember things. And I'm glad they did that too, because I don't remember it. Things were really foggy from 7 to 7:45. They were prepping me for the C-section. I don't remember much at all except for being really, really, really thirsty and really sick. It's kind of patchy. I remember being in my room throwing up and wanting ice, and then I remember being in the operating room and seeing my husband's eyes, looking down at me and holding my hand and being really scared. And then I want to say I remember hearing Tanner's cry, but I don't. I feel like I'm imagining that I did. I wish that I did, but I don't remember it. I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe. I felt like there was an elephant or something really, really heavy sitting on my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. My temperature was 105.7, I believe, when Tanner was born. And his temperature was 104.5. So he was rushed off to have antibiotics, but I didn't get to have that moment after birth of having them on my chest and doing skin to skin and nursing right away, and that has really bothered me for a really, really long time, and I think it probably always will, not having that moment with him. My husband went with him to the nursery to get him cleaned up and his shots and his antibiotics, and he was really sick. He was really lethargic. He didn't cry at all. He wouldn't cry for the IV that they were trying to get into his arm. He didn't cry with his bath. He didn't cry with anything. And I was watching some of the videos that my mom and my husband took, and it was so sad. He was sick, and then I was really sick too. In recovery, I remember not being able to breathe and crying because I couldn't catch my breath, and I felt like my tongue was blocking my airway, and everything was it was awful. But then, just like from one split second to the next, it was like a light switch. It just stopped. My fever broke. I felt better. I could breathe, and everything was clear. It was pretty incredible having that such a drastic change from one moment to the next. So after 47 hours of labor, I had a C-section. He was born at 8:06 in the morning on December 8th, 2011. I didn't get a chance to try to nurse him for 6 hours after delivery for the antibiotics and being monitored in the nursery. And I wasn't able to get out of bed until the epidural and surgery wore off. Thankfully, his IV blew, and they were able to sneak him into my room just for like 15 minutes. I got to look at him and touch his face and his little feet and his hands and his hair, and I got to have that moment with him. But I wasn't able to try to nurse him for 6 whole hours. Thankfully, he ended up doing great, and we had a great nursing relationship. So I'm thankful for that, but I'm still very bitter with my doctor, thinking he could break my water at a fingertip dilated. Who does that? I'm mad at him that he didn't listen to me when I told him I knew when his due date was. Give me a couple more weeks before trying to induce me. I imagine in my mind a lot of a different outcome, like maybe if I was able to go into labor on my own and having that, oh, is this the moment? Should I go to the hospital now? I think this is it. I'm never going to have that moment. I try not to dwell on it, but it's hard not to when it's such a huge part of your life. I'm very thankful. He's happy and healthy, and he's a rambunctious 2-year-old, and he's wonderful. I love him so much. So I try to be thankful for that. the story is still a lot longer than what I just told you, but a lot of it is not really that important. I'm kind of trying to make it a little bit more generalized because I could sit here and talk for hours about everything. So hopefully it's not too rambled and jumbly, and if somebody out there is searching YouTube for labor and delivery stories like I did with both of my pregnancies, and your doctor is trying to push you into induction, and if you have that feeling that it's not the right thing to do, if you are not dilated, if you're not effaced, if you just have that gut feeling that it's not something you should do, follow your gut. Please